It is 6 in the morning in the red clay hills of North Georgia. The fog is still down in the bottoms, and the sun is just lifting over the locust post that Hank Mullins' grandfather drove into this ground in 1937. Hank is standing at the edge of what, 18 months ago, was a wall of green 30 feet high. A kudzu wall. The kind of wall every driver from Atlanta to Birmingham has stared at out the window of a pickup truck. The wall is gone. What is standing on the bare red clay where the wall used to be is 200 goats moving slow across the slope, heads down, working. Hank watches them for a long minute. Then he says it the way a man says things he never expected to live to say. Granddaddy planted it. Government paid him $8 an acre. He is not the only farmer in the South saying this. Across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the Carolinas, the wall is coming down. And what is bringing it down is not herbicide. It is not bush hog. It is not 60 years of federal money. It is something the country forgot to look at while it was busy spraying. To understand how Hank's grandfather got paid $8 an acre to plant a vine that his grandson is now paying 200 goats to eat, you have to go back to 1932. The Dust Bowl was tearing up the plains. The South was bleeding red clay into every creek and river from the Appalachians to the Gulf. 100 years of cotton had stripped the topsoil off entire counties, and the Roosevelt administration, in the middle of the Great Depression, needed a fix. The man they put in charge of it was Hugh Hammond Bennett, the first chief of the U.S. Soil Conservation Service, the federal government's senior expert on dirt. Bennett needed a plant that would do 4 things at once: grow fast, hold soil, feed cattle, and survive in the hard-baked clay of the depleted South. He believed he had found one. A vine from East Asia, first brought to America at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876, where the Japanese government had grown it as ornamental shade over their pavilion. Kudzu, Pueraria, Montana. Starting in 1935, the Soil Conservation Service began paying Southern farmers approximately $8 an acre, adjusted for inflation, somewhere around $170 an acre in today's money, to plant kudzu on their depleted land. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the youth work program of the New Deal, set up nursery operations across the Southeast and grew kudzu seedlings by the tens of millions. The total acreage formerly planted under USDA programs ran somewhere between 2 and 3 million acres across the affected states. And then the country fell in love with it. By 1947, an Atlanta radio host named Channing Cope had founded the Kudzu Club of America, 20,000 members, kudzu queens at county fairs, kudzu festivals in Tennessee and Alabama. Better Homes and Gardens published kudzu jelly recipes. A vine the federal government had paid people to plant became, for a brief decade, a southern point of pride. America loved it. In 1953, quietly, with no press conference, the Soil Conservation Service stopped recommending it. In 1970, the U.S. Department of Agriculture officially listed kudzu as a weed. In 1997, it was added to the federal noxious weed list. And over the next half-century, the same federal government that had paid farmers to plant kudzu spent an estimated $500 million trying to kill what it had asked them to plant. Roundup, Crossbow, Tordon, Triclopyr, herbicide programs at the state level, at the federal level, in every southern state from Texas to Virginia. The kudzu kept growing. But the story everyone tells about kudzu, the green monster, the vine that ate the South, the unstoppable invader, that story turned out to be bigger than the plant. In 2009, a plant ecologist at the University of Maryland named Erwin Forsyth started doing something that, in retrospect, almost no one else had bothered to do. He started measuring. For decades, the standard public figure for kudzu coverage in the United States was around 7 million acres. The figure for annual spread was around 150,000 acres a year. These numbers showed up in newspaper articles, in policy briefs, in textbooks. They had been repeated so many times that nobody seemed to remember who had calculated them in the first place. Forsyth, working with U.S. Forest Service researcher James Miller, decided to test them. They used satellite imagery. They used Forest Service inventory plots, the same plots foresters use to measure timber and tree mortality every 5 years. They ground-truthed sites across the Southeast. What they published in 2015 was a number nobody expected, off by 30. The actual coverage of kudzu in U.S. forest land, by their measurements, was around 227,000 acres, not 7 million. The actual spread rate was approximately 2,500 acres a year, not 150,000. The numbers the country had been working from for 40 years were inflated by roughly a factor of 30. How does a national myth get that far off the truth? 2 ways. The first is what people see. Kudzu is one of the most visible plants in America from a moving car. A green wall of kudzu along a roadside is 50 feet high, drops to the shoulder, and follows the highway for miles. Drive 100 miles of Interstate 75 from Macon to Chattanooga in July, and you will see kudzu the entire way. The mind extrapolates outward. If it is on every roadside, it must be everywhere. The second is what the plant actually does. Kudzu needs light. It is a sun-loving vine. It thrives on edges, roadsides, abandoned farmland, fence lines, power line cuts, the gaps in disturbed habitat. It is, in ecological terms, an edge species. What it cannot do is penetrate the interior of an intact forest. The canopy of a mature eastern oak hickory forest, closed overhead, shades kudzu out. The vine cannot survive deep shade. Forsyth and Miller's data showed it. Where the canopy was closed, kudzu was absent. Where it was open, kudzu was there. The kudzu wall is a wall, 2-dimensional. It does not go very deep behind the road. But it does not have to go deep to be a problem. On pasture, in cut-over timber, along the 1,000 miles of railroad right-of-way and the tens of thousands of miles of highway shoulder across the South, kudzu was still winning. $500 million in herbicide had barely dented it. Until 2003, when a Maryland sheep farmer named Brian Cash had an idea so simple that no one in Washington had bothered to try it. He bought goats. Brian Cash runs an operation called Eco-Goats out of Davidsonville, Maryland. He started it with 40 animals in 2003. The first question every farmer asks is the same question. Why goats? Why not cattle? Why not sheep? Why not the animal you already have on your land? The answer is co-evolution. Cattle, Bos taurus, evolved on the grasslands of Eurasia. They are bulk grass eaters. They will browse kudzu when it is young and tender, but they will not touch it once it flowers. The flower is bitter. The mature leaf is tough. After the first growing season, cattle move on. Sheep, Ovis aries, do somewhat better. They will eat young kudzu and some mature leaves, but they have narrow muzzles built for grazing close to the ground, not for browsing vines hanging from a fence line at chest height. Goats, Capra hircus. Domesticated in the mountains of the Middle East and Central Asia roughly 10,000 years ago, the genus Capra evolved alongside Pararia's wild ancestors in the same continental geography. For 10,000 years, goats and kudzu have been in the same room. They know each other. A goat eats kudzu top down, the flower first, then the leaf, then the vine, then, if the patch is grazed long enough, the bark off the vine and the surface of the root crown itself. A single adult goat will consume 6 to 8 pounds of kudzu biomass per day. 100 goats can clear an acre of kudzu in 1 to 2 days. But the kudzu does not die in one cycle. Underground, the root crown, the carbon storage organ of a mature kudzu plant, can weigh 400 pounds and run 7 feet deep. It holds 2 to 3 years of stored starch. Cut the vine and the root pushes new growth within weeks. What kills the kudzu is rotational grazing. 3 to 4 cycles over 18 to 24 months. Each cycle pulls more carbon out of the root. Eventually, the root crown exhausts itself and the plant dies. The economics are what changed the industry. Goat rental for kudzu clearing runs roughly $300 to $1,000 an acre across the full 18-month cycle, depending on terrain, density, and the operator. Herbicide programs, with repeated treatments over the same period, run $1,500 to $3,000 an acre, with chemical residue, soil impact, and the labor cost of spraying. Mechanical clearing, bush hog, mulcher, costs less per pass but kills nothing. The kudzu is back in 6 weeks. By 2005, Cash had his first commercial contract. The city of Annapolis, Maryland, hired eco-goats to clear kudzu off public parkland. By 2010, Lanny Malmberg's operation, Goat Green LLC, was running 1,000-head herds across the West. By 2020, kudzu grazing operations had spread to more than 100 operators across the South, with state departments of transportation in Georgia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas signing year-over-year contracts. The animal half the farms in the South already kept in the back pasture turned out to be the most effective weapon the United States had ever deployed against the vine the United States had planted. But goats can only work where you can put a fence. What about the 1,000 miles of highway shoulder where you cannot? The railroad right-of-ways? The kudzu walls along the Blue Ridge Parkway? Something else had to handle the open ground. And in 2009, something arrived from across the Pacific that no one had asked for. It is worth understanding why kudzu is so hard to kill before any of this works. A mature kudzu vine grows up to a foot per day in the southern summer. It is the fastest growing plant in the eastern United States. Each leaf node, where a leaf joins the vine, can root if it touches soil. A vine running 30 feet across a fence will root at 5 places. Each root becomes a new center of growth. Underground, the root crown develops over years. A 10-year-old kudzu patch is not 100 individual plants. It is one connected organism, a single network of root crowns linked by underground runners, sharing carbon, sharing water, sharing energy. The root crown stores enough starch to push new growth for 2 to 3 years, even after every leaf has been removed. This is why a bush hog never works. The bush hog cuts the vine. The crown is still full of fuel. In its native range, Japan, Korea, eastern China, kudzu is kept in check by an entire community of insects, fungi, and large herbivores that co-evolved with it for millions of years. Specialist beetles, specialist plant viruses, Asiatic black bears that browse the young shoots in spring. When kudzu came to America in 1876, none of those organisms came with it. For 133 years, it had no specialist enemies on this continent. Then, in 2009, one of them arrived, by accident, on its own. In October of 2009, an entomologist at the University of Georgia named Wayne Gardner began receiving phone calls about a small brown insect appearing in huge numbers on the Kudzu along the perimeter of the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. The insect was bean-shaped, 4 to 6 millimeters long, with squared shoulders and a hard shell. Gardner's lab identified it quickly: Megacopta cribraria, the bean plataspid. Native to Japan, China, and Korea, and one of the principal native enemies of kudzu in its home range. It had almost certainly arrived in cargo at the Atlanta airport. The detection counties, 9 of them, all in a tight ring around Hartsfield-Jackson, were the signature of an air freight introduction. Megacopta cribraria does to kudzu what no Native American insect had ever done. It sucks sap from the vine. In high enough densities, it reduces photosynthesis to the point that kudzu biomass declines measurably across the growing season. University of Georgia studies, led by Gardner's lab between 2012 and 2018, documented kudzu biomass reductions of around 33% per growing season in stands with established kudzu bug populations. Within 5 years of detection, Megacopta cribraria had spread to 13 states: Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. It moved on the wind. It moved on vehicles. It moved everywhere kudzu was, and the kudzu was everywhere. For about 3 years, this looked like the cleanest case of accidental biological control the United States had ever received. A specialist predator that arrived on its own, attacked the target invader, and required no government release program. Then, the soybean farmers started calling. Soybeans, Glycine max, are in the same plant family as kudzu, Fabaceae, the bean family, and Megacopta cribraria, which evolved to feed on bean family hosts in Asia, did not draw a fine distinction between Asian kudzu and American soybeans. The U.S. soybean industry is worth approximately $40 billion a year. It is the second largest field crop in the country after corn. And in 2013 and 2014, soybean fields across Georgia and Alabama began reporting yield losses of 20 to 60% in heavily infested fields. The cure was suddenly a worse disease than the original. The USDA scrambled. Researchers identified the kudzu bug's primary natural enemy in Asia, a tiny parasitoid wasp called Paratelinomus saccharalis. The wasp lays its eggs inside kudzu bug eggs. Its own larva hatches first and consumes the bug egg from the inside. Beginning around 2017, Paratelinomus releases began across the affected states. The wasp established. The kudzu bug populations began to fall. By 2026, kudzu bug densities have declined 60 to 80% from their peak across most of the southeast. The wasp is doing what wasps do. The kudzu bug is still working on the kudzu, just at lower density. Soybean damage has become manageable. What had started as one accidental introduction had become a chain of 3. A vine that was supposed to fix the soil, a bug that was supposed to control the vine, a wasp that was supposed to control the bug, each one arriving without permission, each one finding its place in the food web of a country that had not asked for any of them. The goats are not just clearing kudzu, they are eating it, and then they are being eaten themselves. The U.S. goat meat market is worth approximately $250 million a year and growing at 4% annually, the fastest growing red meat segment in America. Most of the demand comes from immigrant communities, Caribbean buyers in Miami and New York, African and Latino communities across the South, South Asian and Muslim markets from Detroit to Atlanta, cabrito sales in Texas, halal slaughter operations near every major city. Brian Cash's operation in Maryland earns twice. He charges the city of Annapolis to clear kudzu. He sells the meat afterward. So does Lonnie Malmberg in Wyoming. So does Tim Will, who runs a 500-head operation in western North Carolina and sells direct to halal markets in Atlanta. Goats raised on kudzu have one significant market advantage. They are chemical-free by default. No herbicide is sprayed on the land they graze. No pesticide. The meat moves at a small premium, $3 to $5 per pound hot carcass weight, where conventional goat meat runs slightly less. The vine itself has a much smaller market. Kudzu root starch, Kudzu powder, is a traditional Japanese ingredient used as a thickener in cooking in an herbal medicine. It runs around $20 a pound in specialty markets. Kudzu jelly, made from the purple flower in late summer, is a southern craft food sold at farmers markets across Georgia and Alabama. The leaves are eaten as namul in Korean cooking. Kudzu will never become a commercial-scale food in the United States the way Asian carp or wild boar might. It is too fibrous, too widespread, too cheap to bother harvesting at scale. But the goats eating the kudzu, that is a real economy. And in the counties where it works, the chain runs in a circle. Kudzu feeds goats, goats clear kudzu. The cleared land grows native grass or returns to forest. The goats become meat. The meat feeds families who came to America from countries where goat is the everyday protein their ancestors raised. 3 million acres of bad federal advice has, over 90 years, become a working pasture economy. Kudzu cannot survive in deep shade. A closed canopy of eastern oak-hickory forest or pine-hardwood mix, or even mature pine plantation, blocks enough light at ground level that kudzu cannot photosynthesize enough to maintain itself. The vine retreats. The root crown shrinks. Within a few years of canopy closure overhead, the kudzu beneath is gone. This is why kudzu lives on edges. It is not a forest plant. It is an opening plant. And here is what the Forest Service inventory data has been showing for decades, even before Forsyth and Miller's paper named the pattern. Across the South, where cotton agriculture collapsed in the mid-20th century, abandoned farmland did not stay abandoned. It returned to forest. Loblolly pine came up on its own across millions of acres. Oak and hickory followed in places. By 2010, much of the rural South that had been bare cotton field in 1940 was second-growth forest. And on that returning forest land, kudzu had been shrinking the entire time. Not because anyone was killing it, because the trees were growing up over it. The forest was killing it the whole time. In 2018, the U.S. Forest Service formally ended dedicated funding for kudzu eradication on national forest land in the Southeast. The Internal Review Committee concluded what their inventory data had been telling them for years. Where the forest was managed for canopy closure, kudzu disappeared without intervention. Where management opened the canopy, clear cuts, thinning, road construction, kudzu came back in. The pyramid was complete. Goats killed kudzu where humans put fences. The bug attacked kudzu across the open ground where the goats could not go. And the forest canopy killed kudzu in the deep woods where no one was looking, simply by closing over it. 3 different killers, 3 different parts of the landscape. The thing that herbicide programs never managed to do, get all 3 at once, 3 different living things we're already doing every day, for free. Hank's pasture is not the only pasture. Georgia Department of Transportation now contracts a growing share of roadside kudzu maintenance to goat operators. Alabama Forestry Commission has stopped funded herbicide programs on replanted timber stands, letting canopy closure do the work. Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has actively supported kudzu bug expansion on public land. USDA-PHIS estimates total kudzu coverage in the states where measurement is most consistent has declined 18 to 25% from peak. No quarantine program achieved this. No federal eradication line item achieved this. No single chemical company designed a herbicide that did this. What achieved it was a sheep farmer in Maryland who tried goats in 2003, a bug that flew in on a cargo plane in 2009, and the forests we left alone long enough to grow back over the land we had abandoned. The same pattern is appearing across the country on every problem like this. The Chesapeake oysters returning to a substrate of rock, the blue catfish thinning the carp populations of the Illinois River, the woodpeckers and the wasp finishing the emerald ash borer in Michigan, the chickens and the assassin bugs working the spotted lanternfly across Pennsylvania. We did not design any of it. We have spent 100 years learning that the ecosystem, given enough time and enough room, finds answers we never wrote into any plan. It is 6 in the evening back in the red clay hills of North Georgia. Hank Mullins is sitting on the porch of the house his grandfather built in 1932. The porch faces west, looking out over the pasture where 18 months ago the Kudzu wall stood. In his hands, he is holding a small green ledger, his grandfather's farm diary. He has it open to a page dated April 14, 1937. He reads aloud, the way an old man reads to himself. Planted 6 acres kudzu today. Government man paid $48. He looks up. The wall is gone. In its place is bare red clay turning slowly back to native Bermuda grass. The goats have moved on to the next pasture, 3 counties south, working a Georgia DOT contract along Route 53. Hank closes the diary. Granddaddy planted what the government told him to plant, he says, more to the porch boards than to anyone listening. 60 years the government spent trying to undo what it told him to do. The goats finished it in 18 months. He looks out at the pasture in the failing light. Nature don't owe us nothing, he says. We just had to remember what it could do, and stop putting chemicals in the way long enough to let it do it. For 90 years we built a problem that 90 years of herbicide could not solve. In the end, the answer was a herd of goats, a bug we did not invite, and the trees we forgot to keep cutting down. The kudzu wall came down. It just needed the right thing to eat it,